I'd like to ask Congressman Lewis, what do you think it would take today to spark something of the same kind of movement that you were a part of with Dr. King?
A coming together, more than anything else, I think a coming together of people who share a vision of what we want to take to society. You know, some people said the civil rights movement is old-fashioned, it's out of date, but the work of faith, in my estimation, is never old-fashioned and out of date. It is still relevant, it is still alive. But we have to be prepared to open up and be willing to receive the teaching. We had a young man, a young Methodist minister, by the name of Jim Lawson, that Dr. King would say that he had the best understanding of the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence than anyone he knew. He was a student at Vanderbilt University. He first came down as part of the Fellowship of Reconciliation and FOR, and later enrolled at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And he taught us the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. He was our teacher. He imbues us with the philosophy of the teaching of Jesus, the techniques and tactics of Gandhi, the teaching of Henry Thoreau. So when it came time for us to sit in, we prepared. We had role playing. We had what we call social drama. So when someone would spit on us, or put a lighted cigarette out in our hair, or down our backs, or someone would throw us in jail, or pull us up to lunch having stools, many of us grew to accept the way of nonviolence, the way of peace, the way of love, as a way of life, as a way of living. And during the 60s, and I don't say because I was part of the national movement, but I said because of the teaching of Jim Lawson. It was so disciplined. And Dr. King would come down and speak and talk to us. But we were imbued, we were ready to get on those buses and go on that freedom ride. We were ready to sit in and be prepared to go to jail, and if necessary, we were prepared to give our very lives for what we believed in. I grew up sitting on a lunch counter stool. But the first time I was arrested, I felt free. I felt liberated.
Just to add one sentence to that, Ron. If you hear what Harrison Lewis said tonight just now, we have a lot of events for social justice, lots of events. The difference between events and movements is sacrifice. That's the big difference. Events and networks and conferences are one thing, but what makes a movement finally sacrifice. And I think you heard that story tonight.
Right, that was Ron Sider. If you would tell us who you are and then ask your question, please. Yes.
Bishop Ephraim Karim of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Today, His Holiness the Pope asked all Christians during his Sunday message to pray for Christians who are being persecuted throughout the world. And given that Dr. Martin Luther King's message and journey, I believe, was not only about civil rights, it was more about Christian way. What would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. tell the U.S. administration today concerning the plight of Christians throughout the world, especially what's happening in places like Egypt, Syria, and other places? That's probably for the Congressman.
Well, I've always said, suggested that I think that the world, and you know, Martin Luther King Jr. is not going to return. He's not going to be here. But Christians around the world need individuals that are going to live like a great teacher. Be willing to sacrifice. Be willing to put your body on the line. And some of us might say, well, maybe the Middle East, maybe Egypt, maybe Asia, some other parts of the world need a Martin Luther King. Well, that's Martin Luther King Jr. and all of us. Just follow the Spirit. Go with the Spirit. We used to sing a song, Jim. I'm going to do what the Spirit said do. Just be moved by the Spirit and let it lead you. Let it lead you out. Get in the way. Become a good missionary.
All right. Yes, sir.
I would add also, if I could, that our solidarity with identifying with assaults on religious liberty is very important. And one of the things that I think Dr. King taught us is if we don't speak up on behalf of people who are victimized in one area, we're going to find the erosion in other areas too. So I would agree with you. I know our Bishops' Conference in the United States has said that not just religious liberty in the United States, but throughout the world is going to be so important for us to do. So hopefully today would be that recommitment.
My name is Reverend Sam Collins from Hitchcock, Texas, in the Galveston County area, and we're still recovering from Hurricane Ike. One of the issues they still have yet to rebuild for the poor there almost 5 years after the hurricane. But one of the things that I want the leaders to help us with is the sense of community. We have virtual communities now, hundreds and thousands of friends on Facebook. When you talk about that sacrifice, how are we going to, as leaders in our different communities, get individuals closer together again? Because even in my own family, at my daughter's birthday party, sitting at the table, they're texting each other without talking to each other. And, you know, only 41 years old, I wasn't there when y'all started organizing 50 years ago. But how can we bring our families that have been so spread apart because they don't live next door to each other anymore? The members that come to our church don't live in our community anymore. Our pastors and our leaders don't live in the community anymore. How can we get that sense of community back so that when we have issues like in Galveston where we can organize the community to stand up and say, this is not right. 5 years ago, you bought out all the houses on the West End that were hundreds of thousands of dollars, but these poor people still have not come back home yet. What can we do to get that sense of community back organized?
Well, I'll jump in. Others can respond. My kids are 14 and 10, and they've taught me how to text. I think there really is something very positive how a new generation is already very global. I mean, they can find out anything they want to within seconds. They know how to find out whatever they want to, and it does, in that sense, take them out of the bubbles that people often live in this country. But they make the mistake sometimes of thinking that kind of digital interaction is the same thing as engagement for change, and if you just send a petition or something, that's going to make a difference. But what I'm trying to do is, I remember I was in a meeting with a bunch of folks concerned about the Congo and how dirty minerals in the Congo are called dirty because they're used by, they're sold for weapons for the warlords who are pillaging all kinds of people. But those minerals are critical to our cell phones. Our cell phones need those minerals. So it's a group of CEOs and NGOs trying to figure it out. So I was the lunch religious speaker, which means you've got to inspire people over their bad sandwiches, you know, it's my job. And I said, take out your cell phones. I said, no, I mean take them out now. I took them out. I said, hold them out. I said, this is your significant other. You spend more time with this than any person or anything else now in your life. This is your significant other. So I want to say, and I read the story of the Good Samaritan to them, where Jesus is saying, you know, a lawyer asked Jesus, and by the way, in the story, it was a Washington lawyer. He says, who is my neighbor? And he didn't say, who is my neighbor? He said, who is my neighbor? I want to make sure that I can avoid responsibility. And Jesus uses this story of who stopped by and helped this man. I said, and so I read the Good Samaritan, and people are secular or religious, they all know that story. I said, whoever helped make this cell phone, your significant other now, whoever's life is impacted by that, is your neighbor now. Is your global neighbor. So let's talk about turning supply chains into value chains. And they all stopped eating, and we had a great conversation after that. So I think it does begin to connect us around the world, but then it's got to lead to face-to-face movements, and I see young people doing that. I'm really encouraged these days by what I see of a new generation who really want to do what the gospel says, extend the definition of a neighbor. We're always defining a neighbor as people like us. And in the Gospels, it's always pushing the envelope of who my neighbor is. And I think if the global sense of who we are can, if a new generation can really act on that, I think that's the way forward.